be part of the Startup Grind DC family. I'm thrilled. And with that, let's jump into today and our guest. Scott, first off, just as set the tone before I do it, run us through the companies that you've been an employee of, and then the ones that you started. There's like 6. So where'd you start?
So I started at Texas School and moved over to a company that IBM owned, which was a consulting business, and I was a developer there. And then I moved over to Microsoft. After that, spent 16 years at Microsoft doing multiple different things. And then I launched with 3 other guys, my first company, PointAbout, which is a mobile company. Then we took over another company. I actually became an employee, but then the CEO of another company called GreenLine. And we sold that and exited that nicely. And then we started another company called NetWatcher, which was a cybersecurity firm. And currently, I'm working on another venture called ICollect Holdings.
So I just wanted to run through that so that you can see the immense amount of expertise, with TI and then Microsoft and all this stuff that is education based before you even jumped into the entrepreneurial realm. And it's so cool to me that you are still teaching yourself and learning. And so really our format for today, and we have plenty of time for questions too, but our format will be, let's start off in the very beginning, right? And let's work through your entrepreneurial genes, but then spend some time on some of those businesses and some of those trials and tribulations. But then also end with where you are now and this new learning on crypto and NFT and really what you see in the marketplace as opportunities there. So first off, my favorite thing is that normally when we have a super successful entrepreneur like you, people want to say, oh, I want to be that. Like, I want to be that entrepreneur. That sounds fun. Tell me how I get there. And that's like walking into somebody's house that costs, $20 million and saying, how do I buy this house? It's like, no. I need you to take me back to the very beginning when you had no house, right? When you didn't have that skill set yet and you weren't there, because that's where a lot of people are. And they just want that knowledge of how to get from A to B, and we can worry about, D to M later. But so back to step A, were you a hustler entrepreneur when you were a young guy, or were you more of a coder behind the scenes? Like what did your teenage kind of growth development young Scott look like?
Well, I was more the nerd than anything. I was not the hustler. My parents, I was lucky enough that I received what was called a TI-99. It was one of the very first.
I have one too. Yeah.
And it had a little game called the Killer Caterpillar. And I think my parents wanted me to play the game and learn professional whatever on there. And I ended up taking the Caterpillar game apart and figuring out how to change where the direction he went, the behavior it was. And the fact that I could do that just blew me away, that you could actually change the color of the caterpillar on the screen.
Yeah.
And it was like a day and night experience for me, that knowing that I had that impact. And I just became addicted to the fact that I could do that. I wanted to do more of it. And when I went to college, I was an engineer, but what made me probably the most excited was learning Fortran, because back then, the PC, the AT computer just came out in the market from IBM, and you could actually program. And that's kind of what got me excited and turned on. And I don't think I've ever used a day of my engineering experience, but I've used a lot of the computer experience.
That's awesome. And so it really is that story of developing expertise first, right? Like you clearly had a great data set on that side. So then from there, take us to your first job? Like, what's that first opportunity that you get hired somewhere else?
So I was lucky enough to go to Texas to work as an engineer for Texas Instruments. But when I was there, they realized that I was the only one that really had any computer experience. And even though I was an engineer and I had to do budgets and reforecasts and all this, I kind of befriended a couple people that were using computers. We didn't have computers in the engineering group. We had a mainframe. And I learned something called Desk View, which automated the budgets and automated the forecasts, and I kind of automated my job. And then they realized, the management realized I did that, and they had me automate the jobs of everybody. And I started realizing the bell went off of the productivity gain you can have even in the professional realm, and that kind of was an eye opener. And I ended up taking that. They gave me a couple guys from IBM to redo the MRP system in the plant floor.
What is that?
So MRP is materials requirements and planning. It's how things move around the plant floor and you manage it all. And IBM was redoing that project. But I met these two guys and they're like, well, first of all, I was making $30,000 a year and they were making $60,000 a year and they were my age. And I'm like, how do I do that? Right. And they're like, well, you need to go learn this new thing called C programming. So I was doing Fortran and BASIC and all this stuff. And so I went and learned C programming. I went back to school and ended up knocking on IBM's door and Microsoft's door and a number of other people. IBM put me on a contract, but it was to take this Windows 3. It was Windows before 3.0, right? It was the predecessor to 3.0, and I was actually building code and testing code for this company I never heard of called Microsoft, and or I heard of them, but I never really knew what they were all about, really. And I was working at IBM, but they seemed to be having a lot more fun. And IBM, the CEO Akers and Bill Gates had this food fight over this thing called OS2, and all of a sudden I lost my job because the project went.
And what year is this roughly?
This was
89. 89. Okay, yeah, it was 91, but yeah.
And so I get a call from Microsoft saying, do you want to come over here? And I'm like jumped because, they were having fun. We weren't having a whole lot of fun. And it changed my life. It really did.
I love it. So I want to just emphasize that the amazing thing here for me is that you've got this expertise. You've now developed this technical capability, right? You understand code. You understand how to grow and move software around to improve systems. So what's the moment? All right, take us to the first entrepreneurial moment where you and these two other guys have this opportunity that you see a business market.
Well, it's so fast forward 16 years through Microsoft, I went from a technical person at Microsoft to a business person at Microsoft.
Which is, totally true. Totally cool and very important, because now you're on the biz dev side of the house and kind of understand the numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
And I went from having a lot of fun at Microsoft to the Ballmer era, which wasn't a lot of fun at Microsoft. It felt more like IBM when I was at IBM. And I'm like, these guys have paid me a lot. I've got to, I should be doing more. And the job that I had at Microsoft at the time, it allowed me to work with a ton of entrepreneurs. We were building a lot of different projects with a lot of different companies. And so I was exposed to CEOs of a lot of companies. And, it was the same thing. They were having a lot more fun than I was having at Microsoft. And I thought I could do that. And little did I know I couldn't do that, but I thought I could.
Right.
And so I quit the company. I walked in and I quit one day. There's a lot behind that, but I ended up quitting the company, and I found 3 other guys that had similar desires to start a company. And the 4 of us went and started a company called PointAbout.
And so tell us about PointAbout. What did PointAbout do in the world?
So we knew, I knew 2 things. The one thing I knew is Microsoft was screwing up mobile, because they had Windows Mobile, and they every time the iPhone that was not yet released came up, they were like, you know, it's going to be for consumers, we're for enterprise, and they didn't really understand how the whole thing was going to work. And everybody that I was talking to thought that this was much bigger than Microsoft thought it was going to be. And so when we got together with these three other guys, which they understood, they came from the startup world as well, and they knew that the iPhone was going to be a big deal. So we started a mobile company, and it was a mobile software company at the beginning. It turned into a mobile services company, and then it turned into a mobile software and services company.
So you see this opportunity in mobile and software, and one of the things we talked about this particular business before is the struggles of learning how to deal with governance and partners and the struggles that can arise there. Paint a picture for everybody about the ownership and how decisions were made.
Yeah, so it was kind of tough, and it's probably what drew us apart at the end of the day. At the very beginning, you know, I said that I came out of Microsoft thinking I could do anything. I mean, you're general manager at Microsoft, your people treat you differently. It's you felt like you can get anything done in the world. I go into the startup world, nobody will answer your calls. You know, it's just a different world. I didn't have the muscles. And the three guys that we're working with, they came out of startups and they kind of had the muscles. And it was an interesting dynamic, and there were four of us. So decisions, it was difficult to make decisions with four people, right? You should have three people, or one, you know, 1, 3, 5, right? It's 2 and 4, bad combo.
Yeah. Now the 4, was it 25% each?
It was.
Yeah, which is what I call a stalemate, right? It's like you can't. No one can win an argument, right? As long as it's stacked up in the right side.
And at the end of the day, a little story about the muscles. We couldn't sell anything at the beginning, and my enterprise instincts were telling me go for a minimum license fee of $5,000. And remember, this is 2007, and we couldn't sell anything. And finally, one of the founders said, just prove to me that you can make us $50, right? Because he was losing faith in me, right? And you know what? We dropped. So I had a whole pipeline of deals we were working on. We dropped the price to $500, and we sold a bunch of things all of a sudden. And then we were off to the races, and the whole thing just little mouse wheel started going again, and we were having a lot of fun. That turned into a whole lot of services opportunity, and we started a services business, kept the software going. And we were having a great time. Where things came apart a bit, where they wanted to go really deep on the software side, go out to California, raise a bunch of money, and do the Silicon Valley VC thing. I came from the services part of Microsoft, the part of what I managed there, and I wanted to grow a company through the services realm. And so we kind of had a disconnect, and so I ended up coming out of the company. They sold the services side, bought me out, and we parted ways. And then I went and did the GreenLine.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's so many learnings in PointAbout for you, but the obvious ending one is, of course, every single rep, every single business we start, it's just going to teach you something that prepares you for the next one, right? And so even though that one wasn't the home run for you in particular, it taught you so many of those lessons that prepare you for the next one, which is GreenLine. So to set us up on GreenLine, and really, I want to point out PointAbout was all about mobile, right? And the mobile revolution, and that finding that moment where mobile is, and then so now GreenLine, what's its segment?
So GreenLine was a company that was mostly public sector, and it looked for ship movement data, air passenger data, and looked for the security concerns within it. So if something coming into the United States, does a customs officer need to look at it or not? And use data to figure that out, right? And they were doing about $4 million a year, but unfortunately, they were doing $4 million a year for the last 8 years. Right, and they just couldn't figure out what was going on there. And I knew one of the two co-founders for a long time, and he was a personal friend. He was the CEO, and I was just going in to help them at the beginning. And then I realized that there was he was causing a lot of the issues with the company. And he asked me, and the other board members asked me to become the CEO, and I accepted the role. And we ended up turning some things around, and we got it up to about 16 million a year pretty quick. And then you have to make that point: do you continue on, or do you kind of exit? And we exited to a company here called AT Solutions, and had a really nice exit, and everybody was happy after that.
So that's number two, right? Now, and we get at least a single, if not a double. Feeling good about that. And now you're looking. Did you have that moment that you were sitting still and looking for the next thing and trying to spend some time on the beach?
So the CEO, Dennis Kelly, will hate me for saying this. He's one of the best CEOs in the area. He was the CEO that acquired our company at AT Solutions. But I became the help desk, right? I was no longer the CEO. They put me in an office downstairs and they called me, "Hey, this customer in Malaysia is having trouble. Can you do something about it?" Right? And so I had a whole year, because I had to do an earnout. I had a whole year of sitting in my office doing nothing. And we ended up building a new company in that time called NetWatcher.
Yeah.
It was called Defensive. We renamed it NetWatcher.
Well, one of the things I loved about that is that you also the earnout, right? Like earnout is always this interesting time for any entrepreneur where you either super engaged because you need to hit it, or you're also kind of hanging out on the roof trying to figure out what's next, right? And so
I warned Dennis, I'm like, 365 days, I leave the day after that, right? The day you write the check, right? I leave.
Yeah.
And it was good.
So you guys have that moment, you're searching for what's next, and you end up coming up with a really revolutionary tool that people need.
So what ended up happening is at GreenLine, we always wanted to take the engine that we had and figure out how to expand it. Palantir was killing it in the market, and they were just beginning. And we knew what we had was better than what Palantir was doing, but for our vertical. And I wanted to make that more horizontal. Well, two other guys that I knew, the CTO, Ken, and one of the venture guys that's local here, they had an idea to do some things in cyber. And I'm like, well, why don't we take what we were doing at GreenLine, that concept, and apply it to cyber and focus it narrowly on the small business market. And that's what we ended up doing. And so we built, a very scalable SaaS solution for cybersecurity for the SMBs. And,
SMB being small
business, yeah, right? Small and medium business.
Yeah. And NetWatcher, before we'd even met, and I'm not super technical, but I had heard of NetWatcher, right? I mean, NetWatcher got a pretty big reach in the world, and then ultimately you exit that.
Yeah, right? We sold that to Qualys out in California, out in Silicon Valley.
And what year was that?
That was 2018.
Okay, so it brings us pretty close to now. And how long did you guys run NetWatcher?
About 3 years.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty. And the other thing that I took away from our conversation talking about your career is that you're actually getting better at this and a lot faster, right? Like it feels like you're now spinning things up and learning and knowing the playbook.
Well, with NetWatcher, you get to a point where you have to make a decision. You have to either take venture money and go the A round and give up a major portion of the company and ride it out for another 5 years, or you can exit. And when you're faced with that, you look at the opportunity. All the big players like Tenable and Qualys and Cisco, we're all going down the path in probably 3 years from where we were. We were about 3 years ahead of them, but they were going there fast. And you just look at it and say, we can cash out now and we can make really good money, or we can ride it out for 5 years and maybe make bigger money, but also risk it all. And we decided to, exit and go on to the next one.
I love it. It's such good stories and so spot on. Just from a learning perspective, but also having to make that decision of is it worth it to ride this thing out and get to the next valuation marker, or is it time to make an exit? So So tell me, you're wrapping up NetWatcher. You guys feel good about that one. Certainly another win. And now you're looking for what's next, right? You're back out there. You're trying to figure out what's exciting and what market segment hits next. And where do you start your attention?
Well, so two things I'll tell you. One little quick footnote. The CFO and I, who's a good friend of mine of GreenLine, we went and tried to buy a company and worked 6 months to actively buy this company. And it was working, and then all of a sudden, right? And those things happen, right? And so I spent a good year of my life after that kind of in a something that was it didn't work because of crazy things and people things.
Yeah.
And so after that, the pandemic kind of hit, right? And when the pandemic hit, I had to figure out, what do I do here, right? And so I'm like, well, I always wanted to get back to my technical roots. I've been doing this CEO thing, this leadership thing for a long period of time. I always had people that I partnered with on the technical side. I understood the technology, but I couldn't do the technology. Like I knew what AWS was. I didn't know how to log in and actually create an instance on EC2. I didn't know how to use S3. I didn't know how to put a bucket together, right?
I love it.
And so,
in the line I always use is, I know enough code to know how long it should take you to do it, right? But I totally agree. You're at that moment and you're like, oh, I want to really learn this thing, like actually be able to do it.
And so I decided there was something that I wanted to solve for myself. I picked a problem. I've always been interested in alternative asset investments that do not correlate with the market. And I've been investing in alternative assets for several years, and actually for many years. And I had no way to log in like a Charles Schwab account to look at my alternative investments. And so I wanted to build something for it. And that's where ICollect Holdings came in. And with that, I wanted to figure out how to both grade something as well as value something as well as authenticate something. And I needed to figure out how to go about doing that. And I got deep into AI, so TensorFlow, and I got deep into blockchain. And that's one of the things I know you wanted to talk about with NFTs and whatnot.
Totally. Well, I mean, and I think that you've done an excellent job of really just walking us through that entrepreneur journey that gets us to this point in ICollect and really your learning exercise there. But before we jump off into that land, I'm guessing there's a lot of people online that aren't 100% familiar with crypto and NFT and what the market opportunities there are. So I think one of the great quotes is that software is going to eat the entire business industry, right? So software is eating the world at the moment, and I think there's this opportunity that crypto and NFT is going to eat so many different verification systems, right? Everything from college diplomas to title insurance to banking to of course payment transfers. All these things are about to be totally changed in a big way. Help people understand what's coming from your perspective and what the changes will be. Give us some examples.
So if you don't mind, to understand NFTs, you have to understand Ethereum. To understand Ethereum, you need to know why blockchain, and to understand why blockchain, you need to understand why this whole thing is happening. And so this whole thing is happening. If you think about this for just a second, people don't like to be told what to do by businesses or governments, because over the years things sometimes have been unfair, and sometimes things have all been for the 1%. And people are okay with rules as long as those are fair rules. And there's never been a time in history, and this is the most important thing, Patrick, there's never been a time in history when that problem could be solved. This is the first time in history where there can actually be a solution to that problem. And that's where blockchain comes about. This is a cultural phenomenon. So I've been involved in PCs, I've been involved in the internet, I've been involved in the Web 2.0, I've been involved in mobile, I've been involved in scalable cyber. All these things, this is the biggest one I've ever seen, right? This is by far, because it's cultural, it's going to affect society, and there's a financial incentive backing it all up. And it really is going, like you said, going to change everything. And it's going to impact. Now, it's going to take many, many years to have this impact.
Sure.
But we're at the very beginning of a wave that isn't going to stop. And a lot of people still think crypto's a fad. Well, there's many parts of it that are a mess and are, sensationalized, and, people are taking advantage of other people. But the kernel is extremely important, and it's going to have a major impact. And so if you think about blockchain, so let's move up to the blockchain side of it. Blockchain is a way, so you put nodes out there, they're computers or farms of computers that use an algorithm to make a decision versus a human to make a decision. So if they use an algorithm decentralized across a number of nodes that actually replace the decision body that a human would normally do. So it's no longer MasterCard, the company, making the decision. It's a bunch of computers, thousands and thousands of computers working on an algorithm to figure out whether or not you should be allowed to do that transaction.
One of the ones that just hit headlines is that India has come out with a plan to allow college diplomas to be tracked on the blockchain. And so the reality there is that if you had a college and you need a transcript to prove that you went to that college, today you're going to call the college on the phone and get a transcript, validate that you went there. That if put correctly into a blockchain, then that college could literally, let's say if they were to go out of business and those records were no longer available, it's in the blockchain. It can not be removed, and as new data gets put in, it only makes the old data more concrete. So help people understand from that perspective from blockchain how we then jump to Ethereum.
Right. So Ethereum comes about. So if you look at a blockchain, there's many different types. There's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's Tezos, there's Wax, there's Flow. But you think about, there's I'm going to back up, just say there's permissionless and permissioned, and there's private and there's public. What we are talking about here is public permissionless, right? There's nobody that you have to authenticate with, and the whole world has access to it. Public permissionless. That's where Bitcoin is, that's where Ethereum is, that's where Flow is, that's where Tezos is, that's where Wax is. And all these guys, I look at them and I look at one or two things. I look at utility and use. And Bitcoin, obviously, its utility is store of value. But its use in outside of store of value has been very muddy over the years. Even though it's been around since 2008, it's very muddy, right? But along comes Ethereum, which has this immense, valuable thing called a smart contract. And what that smart contract allows you to do is it's a program that allows you to interact with the chain. So you can do something with the chain. So if I want to make a transaction, I can actually write code that says, well, if we do that transaction for $100, let's give $10 of a royalty back to the owner, right? You can do anything. You can check the weather. Let's not do this transaction unless it's sunny today, right? So you can code anything into this. So when you code things into it, you can code it to create another coin, or you can create a non-fungible token. A non-fungible token is an interesting concept. And fungibility is, you can exchange things. So $1, you have $1, I have $1, we can exchange them and we're still happy, right? But if you have a dog named, Snoop, and I have a dog named Spike, and we can't exchange them, right? So there's a non-fungible. And you can create non-fungible tokens. This is really important for my business because all my business are unique. One ancient coin and another ancient coin are non-fungible, right? One set of $10,000 tennis shoes are different than these Nikes over here that are maybe worth $30,000. So these are non-fungible, just like your diploma and my diploma aren't interchangeable. So you can apply non-fungible tokens to these assets, even though they're physical assets. A lot of people talk about non-fungible tokens in regards to artwork that's digital, but it goes much farther than that, right?
I mean, at the end of the day, tell me if I've got this right, we really could be having NFTs for our physical house, for our car, for artwork, for a specific bottle of wine, for movie tickets. I mean, almost everything could, it doesn't necessarily have to, but from a business use case, you really could have NFTs that are attached to just about every asset in the world that you wanted to track who owned it and when they released it or the other parts of the contract. And so suddenly you could have a real piece of art that is owned by 17 different people with different percentages of ownership.
Well, you just crossed two different things there. Let me piece them apart.
Okay.
The one is, what is an NFT, right? It's kind of like a deed to a house. So it says you own this piece of property during this time frame, and here's a description of what the property is. The only things out there that have something like that are homes, cars, and boats, right? You have titles for cars and boats, and you have deeds for houses, and everything else. So if you've got a $10 million piece of art, how are you going to prove that you own it, right? It's hard.
Yeah.
And so nothing else really has this. Your diploma, how do you really prove that you own it? The school might say you own it, but you have to prove to the school who you are, and that's a process, right? And that right there has a lot of bureaucracy, and it has one central authority, right? What we're talking about is removing that central authority, giving everything provenance. And so when you have provenance, you can prove ownership, you can prove authenticity, you can prove value, and you can register it with the chain and not a central authority. And that has vast improvements in productivity in both business as well as government.
So I have a feeling that many of you I almost need to take a break to try to figure out the questions to ask regarding those particular bits of information. But as we move forward from there, take us to ICollect, right? So ICollect interacts with the blockchain and Ethereum and NFT. Explain to us what specific reason you started ICollect.
So alternative assets, there's really no way to manage them out in the world today. And
what do you mean by alternative assets?
So
coin,
Nike tennis shoes, they can be worth $10,000 a certain pair, right? A rare coin, a rare stamp, a rare baseball card, a rare car, a rare case of wine. All these things are alternative assets, and there's ways to invest in them and do really well in investing in them. But tracking them, authenticity is always an issue. Grading is always an issue. You know, a coin can be a low grade or it can be a high grade. And the low grade can be worth $1,000. The high grade can be worth $1 million. So knowing the authenticity, knowing the grade, knowing the valuation, and most important, knowing the registry. And that all builds what's called provenance, right? Knowing who owned it. So if Picasso, was the owner of something, you can prove it back to Picasso, right? You can do that in the chain. You don't need a central authority to do it. So with ICollect, I wanted to both deal with authentication, and so I wanted to use TensorFlow to do some things around grading, and that is a really fun. TensorFlow is a great environment. It's an AI environment that's really easy for anybody that even knows Python, and so we use TensorFlow for things like grading and authentication, and then we're using blockchain to do things around registry and provenance and valuation, storing and knowing where this all came from. And then it's a collection management system in the middle, right? That deals with all that.
And so your vision initially for ICollect was a minimum viable product to start figuring some of these pieces out, right? And tell us what you've learned in the. I mean, you started it in the last 12 months, right? I mean, post pandemic. So what are a couple of the takeaways of what you see right now?
Well, obviously, when I started this, I was more interested in the TensorFlow AI side of it. And as I started, one day I just said, okay, now it's time to start figuring out the provenance side of things. And I, cracked open the website for Ethereum and learned Web3. And I'm like, how do I understand how to put something on the chain? And then I just started reading and I started going, wow, there's more here than I ever thought there was. This is actually, and so I started learning Bitcoin, I started learning Ethereum, I started learning blockchains, the different blockchains, what makes them more successful. And I started realizing this is a cultural phenomenon. This is much bigger than I ever thought it could be. And all of a sudden, I started talking to other people in the industry. Like I'm working with some great people out in California and in LA right now around artwork, so high-end photography, and we're putting together some high-end photography on a platform that's kind of an OEM version of Iclay, and it allows to do the same thing for high-end artwork for artists. And so if you've got photography and you're a photographer, they don't get royalties, and a lot of people steal their stuff. This is a way to both get royalties and keep people from stealing their stuff. And so if you look at things like, OpenSea and all these marketplaces that are coming up, you can kind of see where we're going with this a little bit. But I can go on and on about this.
Well, we did have a question come in that is perfectly aligned to what we're discussing, and their question was, how about gems and diamonds and things like that?
Yeah.
How do you connect those to the digital tracked world?
Yeah, there's actually I forget the name of it. I just did a podcast. I listened to a podcast the other day about rare diamonds, and there's a lot going on in the rare diamond world around NFTs, and there's a company that's doing really well in that space right now. And this gets to your point that you were making before that we need to wrap back to is around fractionalizing. Right. Once you have an NFT associated with something, you can do interesting financial things. Like if you put it in custody, you can do collateral. You can get collateral for it. You can do fractionalization. You can do multiple things around it. It gets into some of the SEC law that you got to be careful of because you don't want to violate what's called the Howey test. However, you can do a lot of great things with that. And the rare diamond world, some diamonds sell much faster than other diamonds. And there's a whole marketplace being built now around buying diamonds that have provenance associated with them. So they're not blood diamonds. You know exactly where they came from. You can follow the tracks to where they came from, and you can actually fractionalize your ownership.
Interesting. So back to this question, with a physical item, how do you verify that this is the right physical item and it's attached to this blockchain that we've created to track it?
Yeah. So what we're doing, there's multiple answers to that. I'll give you a very simple example though. If you are actually dealing with the artist, say you're dealing with a successful musician that has been around for the last 30 years, but they also paint, right? And so we're dealing with somebody like that. Well, we can actually take the ownership back to the person that's created it. Once they produce the piece, you can RFID tag or NFC tag it, right? You can record that in the metadata of the actual non-fungible token. And the non-fungible token obviously is a registry in itself on the Ethereum blockchain, but you can also put a tag in. We're putting RFID tags into the token, but you could easily do an NFC type thing as well. And when you see some of these people doing that, they're all putting some type of tagging associated with it.
Gotcha. So at the end of the day, if I just had an Apple, then we got to figure out some way to physically attach a RFID tag or some sort of UPC or something that lets us validate that is the actual hash rate.
Well, it's just better.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of solutions out there now that aren't doing that are good solutions and getting momentum. But it's just the more you can track it back, the better off you are.
Gotcha. Very cool. So we're definitely at that time for questions. So please, pour in with any questions that you have for Scott. We've got another 5 minutes here to answer those. And I've thrown out a few, not necessarily acknowledging them. So thanks for those that have asked. But another question that came in that I do think everyone wants to know the answer to, that I'll be interested in your stab at, is what is the cost of Bitcoin by the end of the year, right? I mean, everybody wants to know that, and I know this about you, that while you're not going to throw out a number for us, you're long on it. You do believe it's going to go up from here in some way over the next 10 years, right? So what do you think it'll be by the end of the year?
Well, I personally am not invested in Bitcoin. I am a big investor in Ethereum. So I'll tell you why I'm a big investor in Ethereum, first of all. Because the smart contract concept allows you to build dApps. And remember, I said use and usability. Use and usability on Ethereum is giant, right? This one company that I follow a lot, it's called Zed. You can go to zed.com, and it's racehorses. They built NFTs for racehorses, and there's use and utility. They've already run $29 million worth of US dollars worth of business through the thing, racing horses, right? It's use and utility. People are loving it. They have 55,000 people using that site. It's a dApp, one dApp of the thousands and thousands of dApps that are going on out there on top of Ethereum. And so use and usability. When you look at Bitcoin, the reason I don't invest in it is because it's a store of value. It's like gold. I don't invest in gold, right? I invest in things that have use and usability, and they're going to grow. I think Bitcoin's going to do fine. I do worry about it's becoming more centralized and less decentralized, as you know. And there's a point in time also where it runs out. There's a cap of 100 or 21 million Bitcoin to be mined. We're already at 18 million, right? And so when the miners stop getting the reward for mining, it's going to be a challenge to work through, because now they're just surviving on transaction fees, right? And in Ethereum, they're moving to proof of stake. The consensus algorithm is moving from proof of work, which is Bitcoin and Ethereum today, to proof of stake. And that's a giant change. Plus, they're going to roll-ups, and they're going to sharding, which gets the transactions per second way up. Where, like today, Visa,
making it more efficient, making it essentially
costly.
costly.
Well, Visa does 56,000 transactions a second right now. Bitcoin's at like 6, right, or 7, right? And so the scalability is just a giant difference. And so I'm long on Ethereum because I know what's happening in the architectural change. Now, I'm not saying there isn't risk. Making this change is a giant change for the Ethereum world, and there's risk in that change. And so we'll see what happens. But I'm big on Ethereum. I'm also big on things like Flow and Wax. I'm just not personally invested in Bitcoin, but I think it'll do fine.
Yeah, overall, you feel like the whole industry is going to keep growing.
Oh yeah.
So you're long on a lot of this.
Yeah.
So, a question came in. What's your opinion of fractionalized stocks like what Binance is doing? And then a follow up is there a future, for the Robin Hoodies? Are those apps going to continue to be as big as they are now?
So I'm going to give you a footnote answer. I am big on finding liquidity where liquidity did not exist before. Mm-hmm. And so what fractionalizing alternative assets does is, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. You take a rare coin that's worth $50,000 or a rare pair of tennis shoes worth $10,000. Once you own them, there's no liquidity, right? Well, in this world, once there's an NFT, you put it in custody, you can resell it, you can put it up, you can fractionalize it, everybody can own pieces of it. You get instant ability to have liquidity in these alternative investments, like the diamond question you were asking before. You have instant liquidity. So when you bring in liquidity to a market that had never existed before, you know you have nothing but growth when that happens. So as of where the Robin Hoods go and all that, I'm not I'm probably not the right guy to give feedback on it.
Well, clearly you see the market opportunity here in digital assets, crypto, straight through the NFTs, and my question for you is, and for those watching, in other startups, what are the opportunities that you see that are useful, right? Like I'm in a startup in software for events. Should we be looking at a token or some sort of blockchain? How do you feel like blockchain is gonna eat the world? I mean, do you see any opportunities there for the every startup?
So I'm gonna give you another footnote answer to this, because I think it's something everybody should know and something I'm very excited about. It's called a DAO, Distributed Autonomous Organization, right? It's basically smart contracts running major portions of a company that using algorithms where there used to be bureaucracy in the past. And those companies like Udemy and Uniswap and things like that, they operate on a token. To utilize that company's resources to work through that company, you utilize a token, and that token's traded on Coinbase, and there's a lot of value in it. I think you're going to see over the course of the next 10 years, companies looking for productivity gains, and this is everything about productivity gains, right? And there are now companies popping up to teach you how to build a DAO, right? And there's software on press here and create your own DAO, right? I think that every company in the future will have some component of smart contracts running the bureaucracy, and the amount of opportunity that opens up for startups is just giant, just absolutely giant. And so DAOs are probably the thing that makes me most excited about this space, is because I've watched businesses grow. I've watched businesses fail. I've seen everything in regards to how productivity changes companies. This is the biggest change I've ever seen that can have a dramatic impact on society and business.
Wow, I'm always impressed with your entrepreneurial capabilities and your backstory, but I think that there's no doubt that you've been proven time and time again that you can see markets and opportunities before the rest of the world, and I think here's a good example of that here. So I will pause us there and tell you thank you for taking time to be with us, and bring Brian back in with us to do some announcements. And our goal is to get back in person at some point, right, Brian? You and I get to see each other in person. I look forward to seeing the whole Startup Grind community together in person.
That's right. That's right. Also, for first of all, Scott, thank you for participating. Your story was amazing. Just wondering how folks can reach out to you. Do you have a Twitter handle? You don't have to give your phone number because this is recorded, all right?
It's just Scott SU, at Scott SCOTTSU.
Okay, wonderful. Say it again.
At and then SCOTTSU.
Okay, great.
Scott SU.
Okay, great. So reach out to him, and I'm sure he will reply there. You can interact with him on Twitter. So let me stop recording here. So